Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Deja James with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 380 partner organizations across the Western New York region to build a better Buffalo Niagara. We do policy, we do advocacy, we do research, but we also do media work like this wonderful podcast that we have that airs also once a month on WFO 96.5. So check it out there as well on Sundays, first Sundays. But we're so excited to have this platform to display work of not just our partners, but everyone in the Western New York region and the work that they're doing to try and not just make a better region here, but also speak about national and even federal issues that are going on right now. I would be remiss not to talk about any federally implicated issues on this platform. And we've talked about this one before, immigration, but the New York Immigration Coalition, who I've had on before, is here today to talk a little bit more about knowing your rights, specifically with immigration enforcement. And so it's a really salient topic right now with what's going on in the world. And so we want to make sure our listeners have the information that they need to navigate and do with that what they will. So I'm going to let my guests introduce themselves here today. Thank you so much for joining us on Public Good.
Thank you, Deja. My name is Anna Porter. I'm the Manager of Community Engagement for Western New York with the New York Immigration Coalition. And as Deja said, I'm here to talk about knowing your rights with immigration enforcement.
And New York Immigration Coalition does a lot of things similarly to PPG, where you do advocacy and all of those other things, but you also really educate not just kind of your network of partners and signed on members, but the community at large. And so and you've always had Know Your Rights material, but I'm sure, especially now, a lot of those things are just becoming a lot more important. So what are some of the materials that you all have that you're offering the community at this point?
Yeah, we have seen an increase in demand for our materials since the November election and since the administration change. We have a lot of different materials. We have Know Your Rights curriculum. So we do Know Your Rights workshops and presentations throughout the community, but we also made it available so that people can access it on our website. And that covers different types of law enforcement agents, your basic rights, differences between public and private, and how to be prepared for interactions with ICE, Border Patrol, and local police. So that is actually available on our website in 12 different languages, which is really exciting, along with a facilitator guide if people feel like they are able to bring that into their community as well. We also have a whole list of other resources, some things on immigration enforcement at the workplace. We have Know Your Rights wallet cards, which are probably my favorite. They're tiny little cards that you can put in your pocket or purse that say your rights in English and another language on the other side. So if you don't know English, this is a really important way to be able to exert your rights. Those are available in 15 different languages on our website as well. And we also have a toolkit that we update every 2 months. That toolkit covers all different topics like health, education, but also federal immigration policy updates. And so also available in 12 languages, and a really good way for people to get connected to some of the resources in New York State. And I've said they're all available on our website. Our website is nyic.org/KYR.
Know Your Rights, I'm assuming.
Yes.
But the letter, the acronym, not
yes,
the whole thing. Yeah. So in terms of the materials and knowing your rights, for instance, knowing your rights with law enforcement, what does that entail? What does that cover? Is it like a scenario play-by-play? If you're pulled over, this is what you need to do if you have a green card, or this is what you need to do if you don't have any documentation. Do you get as specific as that in that information?
Yeah, it's a really long curriculum. So we do cover specific interactions with ICE, Border Patrol, and local police, and different places that you might have those interactions. So whether you're interacting with ICE at home, at work, or in public, whether you're interacting with Border Patrol at a transportation facility or at a checkpoint or patrol. And for local police, we spend a lot of time talking about traffic stops and being pulled over. So we cover a lot of things.
Yeah, and I would love for us to get into a few different scenarios, if you don't mind. I think one of the biggest things with the election that people feared was that it wouldn't even matter if you had documentation or not, that if you were under any type of suspicion, you could be just carted away if you had a green card, if you had a student visa, if you have some of these things. So what are you recommending people that are really kind of scared right now and still really don't know what to do? If they do have a green card, should they always have their green card on them? If they have a student visa, should they always have proof and documentation? Does that matter? What do you suggest people do in those scenarios where they do have some sort of documentation?
Yeah, so I'm going to go answer this in like two parts.
Please do.
So first, I think for every situation that anyone is in, whether that is with ICE, Border Patrol, or police, it is important to know your basic rights. So people should know that they have the right to remain silent and not answer questions. They have the right to refuse searches of their body, their home, and their belongings. And they have the right to know if and why they're being detained, and there has to be a legal reason for being detained or arrested. So those things apply to all of the interactions, and so people can make those decisions based on their own status, their own place, no matter what, for all of those interactions with ICE, Border Patrol, local police.
And that applies even if you don't have any documentation.
That is for every person in the United States, regardless of their immigration status. And those come from our constitutional rights. So those are not going to change. And those are the key things to remember. I think the second part of your question was about carrying documentation. It is important that people do know that if you have valid status there are different ways here. If you're a U.S. citizen, you do not have to carry proof of citizenship with you. But if you are someone who has a different immigration status and it is valid, you are supposed to carry that proof as long as you are over 18 years old. So if you have a green card, you should be carrying your green card with you. If you have a work authorization card, you should be carrying that with you as proof of your status.
That's really good to know, because I wouldn't have known, if you are, and forgive me, but if you have a green card, is that the same as being a U.S. citizen at that point, or is it a temporary kind of status until you become a U.S. citizen? I don't know if everyone, including myself, understands all of the differences between kind of the different statuses.
Yeah, so a green card holder is not a U.S. citizen. They are someone who has what we call permanent resident status. Some people who have permanent resident status or who have a green card will later apply to become a citizen of the United States, but that depends on everyone's case and everyone's situation. And then there are a whole list of other statuses that people might have. There are a lot of different ways that people apply for immigration status and have valid status. I'm not going to list them all.
Of course. Yeah, but I think the thing people hear the most is green card or maybe a student visa, depending. And so I don't know if, like I said, I didn't know if all our listeners know, but the other thing that I wanted to cover that people kind of have fear around right now is the school and educational setting. And even it not just being universities, colleges, or higher education, but even elementary schools or high schools or middle schools right now, there were folks who were scared to send their children to school after the November election. And so what have you been seeing in terms of local schools' responses, whether they be public or private, and how have you all been interacting with those spaces to let people know what their rights are?
Yeah, so one of the things that the new administration has done in their first few weeks of office is they rescinded what we called the sensitive location policy. This was a long-standing policy that said immigration enforcement would not go into schools, healthcare facilities, places of worship to do their enforcement activities. So that has changed. That being said, there are still protections in each of these spaces. So one of the things that I cover in our Know Your Rights material is this difference between public and private. And so this is something that is under our Fourth Amendment right, where we see that there can't be, if law enforcement wants to go into a private space, they need to have a judicial warrant. Not an administrative warrant, a judicial warrant that is signed by a judge. And so schools are mostly private spaces because in order to enter them, you have to have the permission of an employee. Usually there is like a security guard in the front of the school, and then you get into the school. So there are a lot of protections for private spaces. And so as long as schools know that they can refuse ICE, they can refuse Border Patrol, they can refuse law enforcement that tries to enter without a judicial warrant, there are these protections. I have seen at the local level, schools be really responsive to trying to protect their immigrant students. So we've actually been able to partner with Buffalo Public Schools and go in and do Know Your Rights presentations, both with staff and then also with immigrant families that go to these schools. We've also been able to start to do what we call family preparedness clinics, where we can help families prepare in case of emergencies so that if something happens, if someone gets detained, and generally just if something bad happens, what happens to your children? Where do they go? Do they have a guardian that they can go to that is safe? And so we've had a really good response from the schools in supporting the work that we do, and that has been really, really awesome.
That's great that you have access to family and community that way, because I often wonder, how are we reaching certain communities and where are they mostly? And unfortunately, they are kind of those more private spaces like schools, places of worship. And I find when we do community outreach, even for other reasons, that's kind of where we'll partner with local churches, local mosques, local temples or schools. We've been to Buffalo Public School and Saturday academies ourselves for other things. So it's a really great place to like directly reach community. How has the reception been from community in those spaces? Do they feel like they're equipped to handle kind of the current times? I think there's a couple of other projects that PPG's been working on in the immigrant and refugee space, and we've wanted to kind of have community meetings or different things. And there's just this really huge fear of even gathering in like a publicly, publicized place because they fear it's going to be targeted in some way. And I just can't imagine, living with that fear. So I'm just wondering, like, in terms of what you've seen and how you felt that the information has landed with community and if you feel it's helping kind of, salve some of those fears a bit.
Yeah, definitely. What we try to say is spread knowledge, not fear. And so what I try to do with my workshops and with my community events is have the community leave feeling empowered by the knowledge that they've gained so that they know their rights and they feel more prepared and comfortable to exert those rights. People are really afraid right now. There are constantly changing immigration policies every day. I feel like there is something new that drops. And the best thing that we can do is make sure that people feel prepared and calm to have these interactions. I do see people being afraid to go out, but I also see people leave these workshops feeling a little bit more prepared and more connected to community and knowing that there are other people that support the immigrant community, even if everything that's coming out of the news is against them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there just is that public perception, even like there's some Canadians that are like, oh, all you Americans, you did this. And I'm like, there's a lot of us here who are not happy with what's going on right now. And, I just hate that a lot of the political fervor right now is just like us versus them mentality in such a way that makes it just seem like even the person in the grocery store next to you is like your adversary. And when we And I think that's kind of purposeful in like a rising fascist governments, like to make us so scared of each other that like we just get angry and divided, right? But the solution to that is coming together, spreading correct and safe information, and bringing community together. So I think that that's so integral with all the kind of fast changes that's been happening and the different executive orders and all of that. Have you had to adjust the Know Your Rights material very much? It sounded like the core tenets of your Know Your Rights material is just like the Constitution, which is like ever present and always, right? Even if that's not always respected or abided by for every citizen or every person in this country the same, which is like a historical thing. But how have you had to adjust any of the material, or have you had to kind of add anything? I didn't even know that about the change you said that came down that changed the private space,
the protected areas.
That's crazy. I mean, I didn't know that. That's insane. It's also because I've been avoiding the news a bit. But what other changes have there been that you've all had to kind of respond to and make sure people know what they can do about it,
Yeah, I think it really has felt like there's a always changing way that we approach Know Your Rights. As you said, the core of Know Your Rights hasn't really changed. So the core comes from our U.S. Constitution, and we don't foresee that changing anytime soon. But the way that we have to present it kind of does, because we are seeing a government that pushes against these rights and really makes us feel like we have to be confident in them to exert them. So part of one thing that I do that has changed is, yes, I tell people, for example, the difference between public and private. So I'll tell people your private space, your home has special protections under the law. Only a judicial warrant lets law enforcement come into your home, come into a private space. But I also add like extra pieces of being like, hey, make sure that this is actually a judicial warrant. This is not an administrative warrant. So just for listeners, there is a difference. A judicial warrant is a document that is signed by a judge, issued by a court, and it has specific information like the correct address of the place that law enforcement is trying to enter. But an administrative warrant is something that is signed off by DHS, or Department of Homeland Security staff, and it does not give permission to enter private spaces. And so really emphasizing that, hey, maybe ICE, maybe Border Patrol will try to use this other type of warrant to get into your home. So you have to be the one who knows. Like, you have to know what your right is and that you can refuse entry if they don't have this. So really telling people that they can say no has been one really important thing that I think is just a tonal shift. Like, it's
shifting the power dynamic,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think people feel like when something like law enforcement comes to your door, like immediately in that interaction, you're powerless. Like, you can't say anything. They're the ones that have the authority, and there's nothing you can do about it other than maybe the remain silent thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the only way I can protect myself, if I just don't incriminate myself in any way and just try to get this interaction over with as soon as possible. Which can also just lead to more danger when the fact of the matter is they may or may not have a right to be here interacting with you in this moment anyway. I mean, even I kind of get like a fear reaction to that. Like, I know, like, in my mind that I can say no or tell, a law enforcement officer to go away or this interaction isn't legal, but it's always, for me, like, will they listen to me? I think there's that fear of like, does it even matter? I don't know if you've gotten that kind of, fear and feedback. Like, how do you kind of help people get past that initial fear reaction?
Yeah, 100%. I think everyone just has that natural feeling like it is intimidating to have interactions with law enforcement, no matter what. And so giving people the confidence to be able to say no, to say, I do not consent. We do some practice. I give people keywords that they can say. this is sort of the way that we overcome that. But the fear is natural. I think we all have had that and have had those experiences. Even being pulled over by the police if you are speeding or something like that, that creates a fear, intimidation. One other thing I should say also is that we tell people that they can not answer their door also. Like, you don't have to open the door. You can close the door if there is someone at your door that you do not know, if it is ICE. If they have a warrant, they will tell you they have a warrant. If they don't have a warrant, you can keep the door closed to not have that interaction.
That's really powerful as well, because I think immediately you feel like I have to answer this call or I have to have this interaction so that I don't get in trouble. But it will just lead to a further situation that you could have avoided in the first place. And I think empowering people to know that, like, yes, your space is your space and you can keep that private in whatever way you need to do. I just love like you said, you're saying you're empowering people. And I really think it is just really comforting to realize that we still do have some rights while we have them, at least. So I think that's really interesting. I'm wondering if there's any other just parts of the Know Your Rights training that you can kind of let our listeners know about for now. And then if you could let us know how we can get in contact with you if a listener or an organization that's listening wants to maybe have a Know Your Rights training with their staff or with clients of theirs or something like that. How can they get in touch with you about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I didn't talk about here, but is also in our presentation and in our materials, is knowing the difference between different types of law enforcement. I think there's a lot of confusion and fear. So people might say, oh, there's ICE here, but it's Border Patrol or it's police. So knowing the difference between those and what those type of interactions are. Border Patrol is typically people who are on the border zone. Buffalo is a border zone. We're in the 100-mile border zone due to our proximity to Canada. So we do see a lot of Border Patrol. They wear green uniforms. ICE is the other one that we see a lot. They're harder to identify. They're not always in uniform, but sometimes they are. And then local law enforcement being different from these. Local law enforcement being our Buffalo police. They are not the people doing immigration enforcement. They're supposed to focus on crime and safety. So knowing the difference between those and what type of questions you have to answer.
Can I ask really quick too, between Border Patrol and ICE, is there kind of a huge difference in how they go about doing their jobs? Do people usually have a fear of one more than the other? What is the difference particularly between Border Patrol and ICE?
Yeah, for sure. I think ICE is, it just creates a lot of fear. So yeah. I think when people hear ICE, it's a fear response. They do have similar jurisdictions because it is our immigration system. So they're both federal agents. Typically, the difference, I would say, is where you have those interactions. Border Patrol, as I said, is in our border zones. And we see them often on modes of transportation. So like intercity transportation, checkpoints and patrols along the road, or oftentimes following a traffic stop if the local police does call Border Patrol, which Buffalo is not a sanctuary city. New York State is not a sanctuary state. So our police can share information, can work with immigration officials. So that's Border Patrol. ICE, on the other hand, they can work anywhere in the country. So we do have Border Patrol and ICE because we're a border zone. But ICE can work anywhere. They typically are seen in interactions at home, the workplace, or also in public. And again, they can wear uniforms that say police, that say immigration enforcement, that say federal agent, but they also might be in plain clothes. So those are harder to identify, I would say, than Border Patrol agents.
Yeah, that's a little scarier. That's,
yeah.
Admittedly, that's a little bit more intimidating. I think that, recently there was a public town hall of some local elected officials, won't get into who, but they made the argument that because Buffalo is not a sanctuary city, that means we have less ICE. And so I just wanted to know your opinion about that, and what sanctuary city means versus what it doesn't mean. Because I think in that context, they were being pressed about why isn't Buffalo a sanctuary city and why don't we become a sanctuary city? And their argument was it kind of depletes some of Border Patrol's agency, and so then it's supplemented by the federal government where they send more ICE to places like that, because it becomes a target. I don't know. That was just an argument we heard recently, actually in the last week. So I just wanted your little opinion on that.
So I don't know for sure all of this, but both Border Patrol and ICE are federal agents. So they both could be sent out to do this type of work. Really what I think a sanctuary city means is that there is no collusion between federal immigration agents and local police. And that could include Border Patrol or ICE. We at the New York Immigration Coalition very much push for things like New York for All, which would stop collusion between immigration enforcement and local police.
And that would be across all of New York State.
And that would be across all of New York State. So we want this to pass on the state level, but also I would love to see Buffalo become a sanctuary city. Mm-hmm. And I just really don't see that argument of, it'll make us like a target, they'll send ICE. There is already ICE in Buffalo. ICE is here, Border Patrol is here, so it's already happening.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that delineation. I thank you also for talking about the difference between ICE and Border Patrol, because I don't think a lot of people know that either. And so I just really appreciate you going over that. I do want to circle back to, if folks do want Know Your Rights trainings, how can they get in contact with you? What does that process look like? And about how long are the Know Your Rights trainings, just so people know like what they're signing up for.
Yes, thank you for circling back. So people can reach out to us at KYR, Know Your Rights, KYR at nyic.org to request a Know Your Rights presentation. Typically, Know Your Rights presentations can range. My most common length is about 1 hour or an hour and a half with questions. And we can also help work out getting those interpreted into different languages. So we do have materials in different languages and some language support on our own staff, but we can also hire interpreters and work that out with different community organizations and community members. We also have tons of resources, as I said, so check out our website, nyic.org/KYR. If you want any of the hard copies of resources, I would also encourage people to reach out to that email I said, KYR@nyic.org, because we can work out getting some resources to folks, especially those wallet cards. Those are really really and it's kind of nice to have those in like the nice laminated form. That being said, we do get a lot of requests, so please be patient with us because in the last couple of months, we've just seen the demand increase. So do be patient, but please reach out.
Absolutely understandable with everything that's going on. And I just appreciate you coming on here to be a resource to us, to PPG, to community, to our partners, to our listeners and our viewers. And thank you so much, Anna, for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Deja.
Awesome. This has been The Public Good with Deja James and Anna from the New York Immigration Coalition, talking about your rights, knowing your rights rather, with immigration enforcement. We will make sure to include the links to the Know Your Rights material and the Know Your Rights contact for the New York Immigration Coalition if you want to follow up at all in the comments and the description, wherever you're watching this. But this has been The Public Good. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again next week.